Welcome back to the deep dive. We are your dedicated guides, as always, taking really dense source material and pulling out the practical insights you need. Today, we've really strapped in for something quite technical, but also deeply physical. We're exploring the biomechanical foundations of musculoskeletal alignment in precision and defensive firearm performance. Now, hang on before you think this is too specialized. This isn't just about gear or tactics. It's really a comprehensive look at human kinetics, muscle efficiency, neurobiology under stress, basically optimizing the human machine for complex, repeatable, high-stakes tasks.
That's spot on. Yeah. Our mission today really is to synthesize some pretty dense stuff, kinesiology, biomechanics, stress physiology, to get a clear picture.
Yeah.
We want to understand how skeletal efficiency isn't just helpful, it's the cornerstone, the foundation for stability, for accuracy, endurance. Safety, too. Doesn't matter if it's competition or a defensive situation.
And the argument that just keeps emerging from all these sources is it's really powerful. Shooting, technically, it's a complex psychomotor activity, right? Mind and body coordination. And in this specific area, biomechanical efficiency, it's completely decisive. The sources show optimal alignment doesn't just give you a slight edge. No. It actively cuts down the metabolic cost of holding your position. It delays muscle fatigue, like exponentially. And here's the kicker. It significantly boosts fine motor control exactly when you need it most, when you're under physiological stress.
Yeah, it fundamentally shifts the dynamic. Instead of, fighting your own body, wasting energy just trying to stay stable, you're actually letting the body's passive structure, the bones, support your actions. It frees up your mind, your active muscles, to focus purely on the task at hand. Trigger control, sight picture, processing what's happening.
Okay, let's really unpack this. Start right at the beginning. When people hear good posture, they probably think about, standing up straight at their desk. Before we even get to performance metrics, what does musculoskeletal alignment actually mean in this very specific context? It sounds way more involved than just, shoulders back.
Oh, it's intensely technical. Absolutely.
Yeah.
We're not talking about looking good aesthetically. We're talking pure mechanics. So alignment in this performance context is the precise, intentional, the whole arrangement of all the skeletal segments, how they relate to each other in space. It's all about achieving mechanical equilibrium, minimal internal torque twisting forces across all the joints. We're looking at the whole chain, ground up. Feet position, pelvic tilt, how the spine stacks up, the scapulothoracic complex, your shoulder girdle, basically where the upper limbs sit, even the head. Think of it less like a flexible bag of muscles and more like a stack of building blocks. Carefully balanced. If one block is just slightly off,
Then the ones above it have to lean.
right, create stress, instability. That's a perfect analogy. Exactly. Okay. And that gets right to the heart of why this is so critical. Performance and the sources. They cite folks like Anoka on motor control. It hinges on integrating three systems seamlessly. You've got neuromuscular coordination brain telling muscles what to do, postural control, just staying upright, and critically, skeletal efficiencies, those stacked blocks. Your body in this stance, it's not just holding you, it is the kinetic foundation for everything. It's the platform for stability, for absorbing recoil consistently, ensuring shots go where you intend every time. If that structure is efficient, the brain doesn't have to work as hard. But if one piece, say the pelvis, is tilted wrong or a shoulder's slumped, the rest of that kinetic chain has to compensate, and that compensation, it's always active muscle, which, boom, introduces instability and burns energy you could be using elsewhere.
Right. And all this careful stacking, this balancing act, it leads to what the sources call the gold standard, the natural point of aim, or NPOA.
NPOA, yeah. That's the physical result of getting alignment right. It's that specific posture where you stand, you present the firearm, and the muzzle axis naturally lines up with the target. When your muscular effort is minimized, that's the key. It's the posture of least resistance, where gravity and internal forces kind of cancel out, leaving you at a mechanical 0 point.
Okay, wait a second. I have to push back a bit here because instinctively, especially in a high-stakes moment, my gut says, tense up. Lock it down. Squeeze that gun into submission. Are you really telling me that effort, that tensing, is actually working against me?
It absolutely is. And this is that fascinating efficiency shift we're talking about. The common idea is max stability needs max muscle tension. Right. But the biomechanical reality, clear as day in these sources, is that optimal alignment lets you harness the passive load-bearing capacity of your bones. You rely on structure, not just constant, active muscle firing. Think about it. Active muscle tension. It needs constant nerve signals. Burns ATP, creates waste products like lactic acid, uses oxygen. It's metabolically expensive. Passive support through well-stacked bones, almost free, metabolically speaking. Adopting NPOA is like setting up a tripod with your skeleton. You don't keep flexing the tripod legs to hold the camera steady, do you? The structure does the work. That switch from costly active muscle stabilization to almost free passive skeletal support, that's what lets you perform longer and better.
That distinction. Active tension versus passive stacking. Okay, that's a huge takeaway right there. Now let's dive into the mechanics of load distribution. This efficiency idea only really works if the body's designed to handle recoil through that passive structure, doesn't it? We need to really analyze the roles here. Skeletal support versus muscular compensation.
It's pretty amazing, actually, how well the body is designed for energy transfer when you let it work properly. The skeleton. That's meant to be the primary load-bearing structure for handling the kinetic energy from firing. That force isn't supposed to be soaked up by soft tissue or tiny stabilizer muscles. It's designed to travel along very specific, very strong bony pathways, osseous pathways.
Okay, let's trace that path. So I'm standing there, aligned, relaxed, but stable. I fire. Where does that recoil energy start and where does it go? Map it out for us, based on the literature.
All right. Starts at the hands, obviously. Travels through the metacarpals, the ham bones, then backward through the radius and ulna, those parallel bones in your forearm. Strong structure there. Then up the humerus, the upper arm bone. Now, critically, it hits the scapula, the shoulder blade. Needs a solid connection there. And from the scapula, it finds that connection in the rigid, relatively immobile structure of the thoracic spine, your upper back, if you're aligned correctly. The force gets distributed down the vertebral column, into the pelvis, and then finally dissipated into the ground through your legs and feet. It's a linear, connected chain, designed specifically to channel kinetic energy in a controlled, predictable way. Think about hitting a steel post versus, say, a rubber mattress.
The steel post transfers the force, the mattress absorbs it inefficiently.
Exactly. The skeletal pathway is the steel post. Force travels through structure, not absorbed by squishy stuff.
But if that chain gets broken, like say my elbows flared way out instead of tucked in or my shoulders hunched forward, that kinetic energy can't follow the straight line, can it? What happens then?
Good question. If the path's broken, the energy seeks the path of least resistance. And that's usually the weakest link. A small muscle group, a joint capsule, not designed for that kind of impact. For instance, if a shooter locks their elbow out hard and the shoulder is rolled forward, that recoil doesn't track smoothly into the thoracic spine anymore. Instead, that sharp kinetic impulse gets slammed right onto the delicate rotator cuff tendons, the ligaments, and the shoulder joint. That's just, well, it's a guaranteed recipe for cumulative microtrauma. We'll get more into injuries later, but yeah, bad news.
So the goal is always stacking bones so forces line up with the joint's natural strength axis. Okay, but this loops back to that human tendency to just muscle through things. Let's talk specifically about the problem with relying on muscles. Why is actively tensing up to stabilize so detrimental?
Because when you rely on intense isometric muscle contraction for stability, you're essentially asking muscles to do a job they weren't primarily designed for, being structural beams. That high tension immediately messes with motor unit recruitment. It becomes irregular. See, to hold something steady with high tension, your brain fires off signals to motor units, groups of muscle fibers. But trying to achieve perfect stillness this way, the signals get complex, conflicting. Muscle fibers are rapidly engaging, disengaging, trying to find equilibrium under load, but it's an inherently unstable process at high tension levels.
And what does that internal fight between muscle fibers actually look like? What can we observe?
Tremor. Simple as that. The sources, even classic motor control research like Moritani and DeVries back in '79, they explicitly link this high, unnecessary tension to observable, high-frequency tremor. It fundamentally impairs steadiness. If your main stabilizing tool is vibrating erratically, guess what? Your point of aim is oscillating. You're burning energy, getting tired faster, and creating physical instability. All at once.
Wow, okay. So the benefit of optimal alignment, then, is basically a complete change in the job description for the muscles.
Precisely. Optimal skeletal alignment dramatically cuts down the need for that energy-guzzling, tremor-inducing muscular co-contraction. It shifts the burden of gross load support, holding everything up against gravity and recoil onto the bones where it belongs. This frees up your muscles, especially the big ones. They stop being beams and become, well, fine-tuners. Their job is now just to make small, subtle corrections. They stabilize, yes, but they refine. They don't provide the primary structure. This conservation of muscular effort, that's what delays fatigue and, crucially, preserves the fine motor control you absolutely need for that delicate trigger press.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting for me, connecting this, biomechanical theory to actual results. On the target, if we achieve this skeletal efficiency, minimize muscle tremor, reduce that internal body sway, How does that actually translate onto the scorecard or onto performance in a dynamic situation? We need to look at accuracy and precision.
Yeah, and that distinction is vital. They sound similar, but measure very different things. And alignment hits both, but maybe precision even more directly. We should clarify, drawing on sources like Knudsen.
Lay it out for us. Target face example. What's the difference?
Okay. Accuracy is about hitting what you aim at. Simple, right? Point of aim equals point of impact. If you aim at the bullseye and hit the bullseye, you're accurate. Precision, though, that's about consistency. How tight is your shot group? If you fire 5 shots and they all land in a tiny little cluster over in the 7 ring, well, you are highly precise, but not very accurate.
And the goal is both, obviously, hitting the center consistently.
Exactly. Elite performance demands both. But precision, that ability to replicate the exact same setup shot after shot after shot, that's where reducing internal motion through biomechanics really pays off.
How does that work inside the body? What system gets optimized when your center of mass is stable and not swaying around?
It optimizes your body's internal navigation system, what we call proprioceptive feedback. When good alignment locks down your center of mass, limits those tiny natural oscillations, postural sway, it drastically improves the reliability of this feedback loop.
Proprioception. I know it's the body's sense of where its parts are in space, but break it down conversationally. How does it work? And why does instability scramble the signal?
Okay, think of proprioception like your body's subconscious GPS. It's constantly getting data from specialized sensors. Research like Proske and Gandevia details these beautifully, primarily muscle spindles and joint mechanoreceptors. These tiny sensors are always reporting back to your brain. Okay, elbow joint is at 115 degrees, shoulder feels neutral, wrist is straight. It's nonstop, mostly unconscious data streaming in. Now, if your posture is unstable, if you're relying on active muscle tension to hold position, those muscles are constantly changing length and tension slightly. The joint angles are shifting minutely. The feedback gets noisy, conflicting. Your internal GPS signal is breaking up, basically. Okay. But when alignment is optimal, bones stacked, joints locked into that NPOA position, the feedback becomes crystal clear, reliable, repeatable.
And if the feedback is reliable, the brain can reproduce the exact same physical action without deviation. Shot after shot, that sounds like the very definition of precision.
It is. Reliable feedback enables neuromuscular reproducibility. Your physical setup, those precise angles at the shoulder, elbow, wrist, can be replicated almost identically every single time.
Yeah.
If the muzzle starts from the exact same spot relative to your stable body each time, you've minimized a huge variable. This improved sensor motor fidelity, reliable movement feedback directly boosts both accuracy and precision by slashing sway amplitude. You're essentially taking a big chunk of human error out of the equation.
That deep dive into stability and consistency makes perfect sense for, say, a calm environment, a competitor on a range maybe. But now we have to introduce the real chaos test, don't we? We need to shift focus completely. Defensive scenarios, the brutal physiological reality of high-threat environments. How does alignment go from just being optimal to being an actual survival safeguard?
This is exactly where biomechanics stops being a preference and becomes, well, a non-negotiable requirement for effectiveness, a high-stress event. A genuine threat. It triggers the sympathetic activation cascade, fight or flight. The research on this, particularly in combat stress contexts like Grossman and Christensen outline, is stark.
What are the main chemical players here, the things that flood the system and just change everything?
Primarily, it's the catecholamines, adrenaline, noradrenaline. These hormones hit the system, and boom, immediate body-wide changes. You get instant tachycardia, heart pounds like crazy. Heightened cortical arousal, your brain goes on hyper-alert. But critically, for shooting performance, you get peripheral vasoconstriction.
Vasoconstriction. Blood vessels narrowing. Peripheral means extremities, so blood's being pulled away from the hands and feet.
And shunted towards the core, the large muscles needed for gross motor action. Quads, biceps. The body's making a survival bet. Running or fighting big movements is prioritized over delicate tasks like threading a needle or executing a perfect trigger press.
And with less blood flow to the hands and fingers, the body also shifts neurologically.
Yes, it starts recruiting larger, less precise motor units. You literally lose the neurological ability to make those tiny, fine-tuned, conscious corrections. Your hands become clumsier, less dexterous by physiological design in that moment.
Okay, the sources detail 3 specific observable ways this loss of fine motor control shows up. Let's hit those, because this really paints a picture of what an untrained or poorly aligned person is fighting internally.
Right. First, and maybe the most obvious, is tremor induction. And this isn't just nerves, it's chemical. It's caused by something called progenergic stimulation, specifically impacting the intrinsic hand muscles. The adrenaline itself chemically excites the muscle fibers, causing this fine, high-frequency, uncontrollable shaking. You don't even have to feel scared for your hands to start shaking. You just need that adrenaline dump.
Wow. Okay, chemical tremor. What's second?
Second is grip force inconsistency. This comes from hyperactivation of the main finger-curling muscles, the flexor digitorum profundus and superficialis. Under stress, the default human reaction is just crush grip, squeeze hard. But that inconsistent, often way too strong grip force, it devastates the delicate consistency needed for good trigger control. It torques the gun, throws off muzzle alignment during the press.
Makes sense. And the third manifestation?
The third one is cognitive or perceptual narrowing. Tunnel vision is the common term. Excessive noradrenergic activity, another stress chemical effect, hits the visual cortex. Your focus narrows dramatically. You lose awareness of anything outside that narrow cone. Your ability to process subtle visual cues like getting a perfect sight picture or checking sight alignment during the press just degrades rapidly.
Okay, that's a perfect storm of system breakdown, isn't it? Hands shaking chemically, grip crushing randomly, vision tunneling. So if stress fundamentally degrades our ability to make those small, conscious, fine motor corrections, how does having good alignment baked into muscle memory through training help us avoid just completely falling apart?
This is that critical safeguard mechanism we talked about. If skeletal alignment has been neurologically consolidated through deliberate high-rep training, a different system takes precedence.
Yes.
Motor stabilization compensates for that inevitable fine motor degradation. Your hands might be shaking, your heart might be pounding out of your chest, but your underlying structure, your posture holds.
Ah, so the reliance shifts away from the compromised hands and fingers towards the rigid core.
Exactly. The axial skeleton, your spine, your pelvis, that acts as a highly stable passive framework. Because you're relying on stacked bone, passive structure, not active muscle, which is chemically compromised by the stress hormones, the primary stability mechanism stays online. The alignment becomes automatic. Even with a heart rate through the roof, breathing raggedly, that rigid bony framework maintains muzzle stability far better than tense muscles could. The fine motor skills might be shot, but the gross motor structure, the stance, the posture, the NPOA you trained it, saves the shot. That's why alignment isn't just nice to have, it's the prerequisite for functional stability under fire.
That is a phenomenal, really source-backed argument for why alignment is just essential for defensive readiness. Wow. But let's look beyond just the immediate shot, the mini performance. Let's talk longer term, physical longevity, injury prevention. This seems crucial too.
Oh, absolutely. This is the hidden cost, the one people don't often connect to poor technique until it's too late. The cost of relying on muscular compensation day in, day out. Every single time a firearm discharges, doesn't matter if it's .22 or .308, kinetic energy is produced. If that energy doesn't travel down that efficient linear skeletal path we mapped out,
it has to go somewhere else, gets absorbed by soft tissues, small joints, things not designed for that kind of impact.
Precisely. Poor recoil absorption concentrates mechanical stress, usually on smaller stabilizing muscles and really critically on joint capsules and connective tissues like tendons and ligaments. Repeat that concentrated stress thousands, tens of thousands of times in training. You're subjecting the shooter to cumulative microtrauma, and that directly predisposes them to classic overuse injuries we see all the time in shooting sports.
Okay, the sources get specific here. Let's pinpoint the danger zones. Where does poor alignment tend to cause chronic damage? Start with the shoulder, since it takes that initial hit.
The shoulder is a prime candidate. Poor alignment, think rounded shoulders, shrugging posture where the scapula isn't set back and stable that commonly leads to glenohumeral impingement. Also, rotator cuff tendinopathy. Impingement is literally tendons getting pinched against bone during the rapid recoil sequence because the joint isn't sitting correctly. If you're using muscles to fight the recoil instead of structure to transfer it, those small rotator cuff muscles get overloaded, tear, inflame, chronic pain follows.
Okay, down the arm. The wrist. So often people try to muscle the gun down, fight muzzle flip with their wrists.
And the wrist pays the price. Yeah. We see a lot of radiocarpal strain, so strain in the wrist joint itself, and also carpal tunnel irritation. When the wrist is bent, flexed, or extended, instead of being held in that neutral, strong, stacked position that lines up the forearm bones with the hand, the repeated impact just hammers those joint structures. You can also irritate the median nerve running through the carpal tunnel, trying to muscle down muzzle flip with forearm muscles instead of controlling it with body structure. That repetitive microtrauma adds up fast.
All right, finally, the foundation. The core, lower back, pelvis. This area is supposed to be the big shock absorber, distributing force down to the legs. What goes wrong here?
If the pelvis isn't symmetrical, if it's tilted weirdly, or if the lumbar spine is in a bad position, maybe excessively arched, which is lordosis, or rounded forward, flexed, the shooter is at risk for lumbar facet compression and sacroiliac joint dysfunction. Instead of that powerful recoil impulse being smoothly transferred into the large glute muscles and down the legs, it gets focused onto those small, delicate facet joints in the lower back, or towards the SI joint where the spine meets the pelvis. The back basically becomes a hinge point, absorbing shock violently instead of channeling it smoothly. Leads to chronic low back pain, instability. And, occupational biomechanics research, like work by Stuart McGill, confirms this across many fields. Efficient load distribution through proper posture mitigates cumulative microtrauma, period. So the solution is clear. Correct alignment ensures that recoil energy travels through those linear, stable skeletal pathways. It preserves joint integrity, keeps connective tissues resilient. It lets you train hard, train often, and train for decades without breaking down.
Okay, we've laid out the theory, the mechanics, the stress physiology, the long-term physical costs of getting it wrong. Now, the crucial part, moving from theory to practice. How do we actually build this? How do we go from being someone who consciously muscles the gun around to someone who automatically defaults to resilient skeletal alignment? We need the training methods. How do we optimize this?
It really has to start with that foundational drill we mentioned earlier, deliberately establishing and constantly refining your natural point of aim, NPOA. This isn't just a warm-up. It's like recalibrating your body's kinetic zero point.
Walk us through it again, step by step. What does someone actually do for this NPOA drill?
All right. You assume your preferred stable stance. Present the firearm towards a clear, single aiming point. Then step 3, deliberately close your eyes. Now the critical part. Consciously, actively relax all muscular tension that isn't absolutely necessary just to hold the firearm up and maintain basic balance. Let things settle. Stay there for a few seconds, really letting go of tension. Then open your eyes. Observe immediately. Where is the firearm's axis, the muzzle, pointing relative to your original target? Any deviation sites drifted left, right, high, low, that tells you exactly where an asymmetry exists in your relaxed structure, an asymmetry that you were previously masking with active muscle tension.
And you said earlier that asymmetry, it usually doesn't start in the arms, does it? Where's the root cause typically found?
Almost always, yeah. It originates lower down, at the pelvic level or in the lower extremities.
Yeah.
Feet position, hip rotation. Because your center of mass is managed down there, if your feet are uneven or your hips are slightly twisted, your upper body has to make constant micro adjustments just to keep your head level and eyes horizontal. That shows up as NPOA drift.
Yeah.
And here's the absolute non-negotiable rule for correcting it. You fix the deviation by repositioning your feet or shifting your pelvis. You adjust the foundation until the sights naturally return to the target without you moving your arms or shoulders. If you correct by moving your arms, you just reintroduce muscular compensation, defeating the whole point. You have to fix the base.
Got it. Fix the foundation, not the superstructure.
Yeah.
Okay, so once that relaxed baseline alignment is established, the next phase is building resilience, right?
Mm-hmm.
If the body can find NPOA when calm, can it hold it when everything's going haywire? This must be the stress inoculation part, simulating that sympathetic nervous system activation.
Exactly. This methodology directly addresses that physiological breakdown under stress we detailed earlier. The goal is simple. Replicate the physical feeling, the adrenergic arousal of a critical incident, but in a safe, controlled training environment. The method. Use high-intensity anaerobic drills, things that jack your heart rate up quickly. Sprints, burpees, heavy kettlebell work, maybe intense push-up sets, anything that gets you breathing hard and heart pounding. The sources often suggest aiming for a heart rate consistently above, say, 120 beats per minute, because that threshold typically ensures you've triggered that full sympathetic cascade, the adrenaline, the noradrenaline release. You want to feel that chemical state.
And then immediately after hitting that physical stress threshold, boom! Present the firearm, try to acquire the target, and maintain NPOA. What's being evaluated there?
2 key things. First, retention of neuromuscular alignment. Does your body automatically snap back to that efficient NPOA posture you practiced, even when you're winded and shaky? Or does it collapse into a tense, inefficient, muscle-heavy stance? Second, you're testing the resilience of your gross motor patterns under that acute physical stress. Fine motor skills will be degraded, the tremor will likely be there, trigger control might feel rough, that's expected. But at the underlying skeletal framework, the NPOA stance itself holds solid. Then you've proven your alignment is becoming consolidated, becoming robust enough to withstand physiological disruption. If you find yourself defaulting to a weak, unstable posture when you're gasping for air, it just means the NPOA hasn't been encoded deeply enough yet. This drill forces reliance on automatic structure because conscious control is partially offline.
Makes perfect sense. Okay, so NPOA drills establish the blueprint, stress inoculation tests its durability.
Right.
What's the final piece to make it truly automatic, truly subconscious?
That comes down to neuromuscular encoding through repetition. This is where sheer volume and quality of practice really make the difference. Repetition isn't just muscle memory in a vague sense. It's specifically about enhancing cerebellar patterning and reinforcing proprioceptive memory. Your cerebellum, that little brain at the base of your skull, is the master coordinator for smooth, automated movement. By repeatedly correctly executing the optimal alignment, you are literally burning that efficient posture into the neural pathways of your central nervous system, hardwiring it.
And the functional result of all that neurological wiring, what does the shooter experience?
The ultimate goal is autonomous reestablishment of optimal alignment. You reach a point where you no longer have to consciously think, okay, feet set, pelvis tucked, shoulders relaxed. The body just does it instantly. The most efficient posture becomes the default. Consistent, progressive dry fire practice, reinforced with live fire sessions focusing on maintaining that structure. It cultivates neural efficiency within the corticospinal tract. That's the main highway for voluntary movement signals from the brain. Motor learning science, folks like Schmidt and Lee have shown this clearly, confirms that this kind of practice reduces response latency. You get into position faster, and critically, it minimizes movement variability. You become faster, smoother, and vastly more consistent without burning conscious thought on how to stand.
Okay, that brings us full circle. Let's synthesize all of this. Connect these training principles directly back to that critical real-world need. Performance when failure just isn't an option.
Right. In those high-threat scenarios, it really boils down to what some call the cognitive bandwidth issue. When you're facing an immediate danger, your brain's processing power, your available attention, is almost entirely consumed by assessing the threat, making rapid decisions, maybe tactical considerations. Your ability to consciously monitor and meticulously adjust your own body position, it plummets. There's just no spare bandwidth for it.
So the person who relies on consciously tweaking their grip or actively holding their stance, they're already behind the curve in that moment.
Way behind. That shooter, the one dependent on conscious muscular adjustments, they're incredibly prone to destabilization when shock, surprise, or extreme stress hits. Their arms tense uncontrollably, their grip goes into crush mode, their whole foundation might wobble because they've lost the mental capacity to actively manage their posture. They become less effective, potentially a liability. Now, contrast that with the individual who has conditioned alignment through high-repetition, biomechanically sound practice. Their body retains automatic alignment. It simply defaults to the efficient skeletal structure because that pattern is burned into the cerebellum. It doesn't require conscious oversight. So they maintain effective ballistic control, repeatable shot placement, even when their conscious mind is totally preoccupied with the threat. They also minimize collateral risk because their shots are more likely to go where intended.
You know, all this evidence taken together, it really does substantiate that old saying, doesn't it? Under duress, you don't rise to the occasion, you default to the level of your training. And this deep dive strongly suggests that the highest, most resilient level of training is the one built on biomechanical efficiency and skeletal structure, not just brute force or conscious effort. So wrapping this all up for you, the listener, what does it all mean? We can really boil down this entire body of source material into three absolutely indispensable pillars, three core benefits of optimal alignment.
Okay, pillar one, enhanced accuracy and precision. By maximizing that passive stability, getting crystal clear proprioceptive feedback, optimal alignment lets your body execute highly consistent, repeatable actions. Better grooves, more reliable hits. Pillar two, sustained stability under sympathetic activation. Under stress, alignment acts like a structural failsafe. It maintains muscle control, keeps your foundation solid, even when adrenaline and physiology are actively degrading your fine motor skills. It's a survival mechanism. And pillar three, mitigation of injury potential, longevity. By making sure recoil energy flows through the strong skeletal pathways, thoracic spine, pelvis, down to the ground, you protect your joints, your connective tissues. You ensure you can train hard and perform effectively for the long haul without chronic pain.
Yeah, the way anatomy, physiology, and motor learning all converge here. The conclusion feels pretty inescapable, doesn't it?
It really does. Alignment isn't just a style choice. It's not an aesthetic preference or some arbitrary technique someone dreamed up. It is a fundamental biomechanical cornerstone of effective performance. And in any situation where stress is high, whether it's defense or high-level competition, it becomes a critical survival mechanism. It dictates whether you can actually do what needs to be done when it matters most.
Wow. Okay, this has been incredibly dense, but really, really illuminating. I want to just quickly recap some of the most surprising, maybe actionable nuggets for you to take away. Remember that super detailed pathway for recoil. Metacarpals, radius luna, humerus, scapula, thoracic spine, pelvis. Understanding that flow helps visualize why alignment prevents energy from going sideways into vulnerable joints. And that hand tremor under stress, remember, it's chemical. Beta adrenergic stimulation. Your hands shake because of adrenaline, not just nerves. That reinforces why relying on structure, not fine hand control, is key under pressure. And finally, that crucial NPOA correction rule. Fix your aim drift by moving your feet or pelvis. Adjust the foundation, never compensate with your arms or shoulders. That just brings back the muscle tension you're trying to eliminate.
Yeah, those are great takeaways. And, if this level of mechanical breakdown intrigues you, the source material definitely points towards where the research needs to go next. It's all about getting more quantitative data. Future studies really need to move beyond just observing effects and start precisely measuring these efficiencies. They suggest using tools like surface electromyography, EMG. Stick sensors on the muscles, actually measure and compare muscle activation levels between shooters with good versus poor alignment. See the difference in energy expenditure. Also, inertial motion analysis using sensors on the body to track tiny movements, joint angles, sway patterns, shot-to-shot variability, really quantify the stability gains. And maybe even recoil force mapping, figuring out exactly how and where that recoil energy is traveling and being dissipated in the body under different postural conditions. Quantifying the energy saved, the stability gained through structure. That's the next logical step to really refine how we teach and train this.
Fascinating stuff. Really pushing the boundaries of understanding performance. Well, whether you're aiming for that perfect score, preparing for a critical situation, or honestly just want to understand how your own body can function more efficiently under pressure in any domain. These principles of skeletal efficiency, of letting structure do the work, they absolutely apply. Thank you so much for joining us on this really deep dive into human performance. Go out there, apply this knowledge, work on consolidating your own alignment, and stay efficient.